Okay, folks, well, you're getting yourself loaded up with all kinds of information, and information is indeed power. Now, some of this information is palatable, it's easy to get down. Other information is a bitter pill to swallow. Well, unfortunately, I think that the information that you're going to get from our next guest is going to be one of those bitter pills, but we doggone better face what's going on in this country. As I mentioned before, we are under attack on many different fronts: economic, spiritual, moral, political, and what you're going to hear now is a military threat. But it's not a military threat that you're used to hearing about. Our next speaker is going to be, excuse me. Thank you. Our next speaker is going to be bringing you information many of you have not heard. You've probably heard bits and pieces about. But this is information that you need to know, because you can't make an informed decision without information. So the next speaker I bring to the podium here, you might want to listen to very carefully. You might want to have a pen and paper and take some notes, because this is going to be happening in your neck of the woods, whether you want to accept that or not. Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Eric Shine.
Thanks, Dave. No, that was excellent, because now I don't have to tell a joke, because you're all feeling well, because he had you rub each other's backs. So I will pass right through that and try to get everything back on schedule. We're running a little bit late, and I'm going to try to keep this down to get everybody out to lunch on time. There's some pretty important information, though, that I need to bring to you. I'm a graduate of Kings Point. It's the United States Merchant Marine Academy. Many people may or may not have heard of it. They may say, oh, Merchant Marine, isn't your hair kind of long? Or, oh, Merchant Marine, where are you stationed? My academy is a sister academy to West Point and to Annapolis, and FDR said in 1943, when he christened my academy, that the United States Merchant Marine Academy, Kings Point, would serve the United States Merchant Marine as West Point serves the military and as Annapolis serves the Navy. They have been attacking not only my academy, but American flag merchant fleet, United States Merchant Marine, and our fisheries. If you think about what's happened to our tuna fleet, tuna canneries, and more, not only even what's going on up in Alaska, not just the Exxon Valdez, but the salmon fisheries and more. The United States Merchant Marine, our international cargo coming into and leaving the United States now, 97% of this cargo is on foreign flag. You know, you hear all this stuff about the war on terror, making us safer. One of the easiest and best ways is to bring American flag shipping back under the American flag. There are things, and this doesn't go, the only reason we have a Navy, the only reason we have a Coast Guard, the only reason we have a Marine Corps is to protect our commercial fleet going from, and these are bridges from our civilization to other civilizations. They are an international right-of-way that is being seized upon, that has been stripped from the American people. It is a bridge, a public trust from our country to others. And what's happening in the Coast Guard has been deeply involved in this. And what I'm bringing to you today is the Coast Guard is saying that it is a special branch of military. That may shock some, and others may say, well, yeah, of course it is. It's got guns, it's got uniforms. Just because a branch of service has guns and uniforms like your local police does not make them into a branch of military. The Coast Guard was set up as a civilian maritime law enforcement agency, and under the changes in Homeland Security in 2003, the Coast Guard moved on March 1st, 2003 into Homeland Security, and it has taken military law, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Title 10, into the Department of Homeland Security. Title 10, military law, is intended for one thing and one thing only: extraordinary circumstances for men and women in uniform, which is basically on the battlefield in the middle of war. We do not have a declared war. We have a quote-unquote authorization to use force. An authorization to use force is like when the Iranian embassy was taken over. We go ahead and authorize the use of force to evacuate the embassy, get our people home, students, personnel from the embassy, and more. And in the extreme circumstance where we have to use military force, we go ahead and do it, and only to extract our people from the embassy, not to start a war. What is going on now is so unconstitutional, it's unimaginable. The U.S. Coast Guard, besides declaring itself to be a special branch of military, Admiral Allen was the individual, and you need to get this individual removed from office ASAP. He was the individual who took over FEMA when Michael Brown, you're doing a good job, Brownie, Brown was removed for being a horse trader in more ways than one from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is an independent agency that he pulled into Homeland Security, and as an admiral of a self-declared special branch of military that they are declaring can violate posse comitatus. And if anybody knows what I would say that probably 90% or more of the people here probably know what posse comitatus is. But for those who don't, and for the recording, posse comitatus was passed after the Civil War by Congress, and it forbade the use of any military forces or assets against the American people, because the North used the military against the South as a police force for quite some time, which is unconstitutional. Ex parte Milligan, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case precedence that was heard very shortly after Reconstruction, decided, and this is our Supreme Court, decided that the suspension of habeas corpus was unconstitutional. That means the suspension of habeas corpus now is unconstitutional because we have not had an amendment to the Constitution to make military tribunals of civilians legal. And that's what's going on right now. That is the one issue that I really need people to focus on. If you take the time to read, and the pages of the transcripts that are outside are not in order. You can see the page number at the bottom. But I've highlighted the very important areas where I bring up the Coast Guard, which I'm not in, never served in, is using JAG officers, Judge Advocate General Officer Corps. They're building a criminal court of appeals for the Coast Guard. They've just prosecuted this individual, a cadet from the Coast Guard Academy. It's never happened in 139 years. First time ever, under military law. This guy is a student. He comes under what's called the honor code, or honor, and he would come before an honor board. He's not an enlisted person. He's not a commissioned officer. He's more civilian in nature than anything, and he should have been turned over to the local civil authorities because the courts are in operation for the case to be heard. And instead, the superintendent of the academy said that he should go before, they basically promoted him to an officer so that he could be prosecuted. I mean, this is just some of the stuff that's going on. Admiral Allen, who is the regulator, and President Bush has talked about this, of taking the regulators and making them work, or having them work more closely with the regulated. That's fascism, it's corporatism. Admiral Allen, he's from Arizona. He's taken on a lot of heat right now for programs like Deepwater, and I ask you to write these programs down and start to investigate them and find out and confront your congressmen and senators and others, and like even G. Edward Griffin brought up last night, become your congressmen and senators. It's upon you to carry on oversight of your government by either watching over it or becoming the government. And that means to run for office. And whether it's state or federal, local, these individuals are internationalists, they're globalists, they're industrialists. They wish to turn the United States into a gulag. They are doing a very good job of it. The proceedings that I'm involved in for the last 5 years, and I really need help with this, I've been standing alone against a branch of military. They're alleging that I'm a civilian, prosecuting me as a civilian. They have deprived me of not only the fact that I'm a naval officer and that I would be getting JAG counsel, they're prosecuting me as or within what would normally be called a special, general, or summary court-martial, without counsel, without JAG counsel. alleging that I'm a civilian. So that means they can do it to everyone here in this room. They can carry, and they've done this before. They did it in the Civil War. I brought up posse comitatus, why it was passed, ex parte Milligan. They did it in the Spanish-American War. They did it in World War I, World War II. There's a very famous case of Duke Kahanamoku from Hawaii. If anybody knows his story and his family, these guys were a bunch of surf rats, but a lot of respect goes out to him. He's also related to the royal family. He's an Olympian swimmer also. He won like 7 gold medals for swimming for the United States. He ended up as the sheriff for Waikiki and fought what the military was doing in imposing military tribunals upon the people of Hawaii. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. These battles have been fought and won before. In 1957, in the middle of the Korean War, a case named Reed versus Covert, where a woman who was married to a service member was grabbed, prosecuted in a military tribunal, put in the brig, and then put in jail. And the thing you need to know about military tribunals, military commissions, you can think to Warner Defense Authorization Bill, Military Commissions Act, HR 1955. And I'm sorry to throw this all out. It's recorded. Please go back and look up some of this stuff and start, some of it's even up on Wikipedia. HR 1955, it's a House bill, Senate Bill 1959. All these things are being passed that go well beyond the first Patriot Act or the second Patriot Act or Homeland Security Act. The Department of Homeland Security was initially going to be, and this is in their own documents, the Department of Homeland Defense. So now we have, and this goes to tax issues. If you think of who and what the Coast Guard was and where it came from, they were the Revenue Cutter Marine that was established by Alexander Hamilton. He built 10 ships to go out, but you know what? All the money that they were taking in was from tariffs from foreign countries and foreign trade coming into the United States. Our government was paid for 100% up until the early 1930s, and then it dropped off to about 75%. Into the 50s, about 50%, and now, it's anyone's best guesstimate between 15 and 30%. So rather than having this paid off of industry, and it is the quickest, easiest way to collect taxes as well, when something comes in from foreign, and you have to understand a lot of the trade and things that are going on from China is individuals in our own country who are carrying on production and moving not only the resources, the assets, the capital, the technology, and more overseas. They are doing it as they sit here in our country, protecting themselves from the rest of us. And they are stealing us blind. The one thing I want to get into as well, I want to explain what they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it so you get a better understanding of the bigger picture. Every time, and this has been going on for hundreds of years, if not thousands, every time they carry on a change in state, which means a change in government from, say, princely state to kingly state, from kingly state to territorial state, from territorial state to state nation, which is what we had before the Civil War, to nation state, which is what we became after the Civil War, to market state, which is what they're declaring now they want to create, which is the North American Union. This is not a bunch of make-believe. They're trying to put out the spin on this. And if you listen to anyone who had the fortune to listen to G. Edward Griffin last night, you see how these individuals come out and lie through their teeth for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and then down the road fight for the, I don't want to say infamy, but the right to who was more important at these proceedings, like the ones that were carried on at Jekyll Island. You've probably heard of books like the 2-volume set by Bill Benson, where he points out that the Secretary of State at the time on the 16th Amendment came out and declared openly that it had passed. And it was like, you go to Goebbels and others from Germany, and you realize that the bigger lie you tell, the longer you tell the lie, the more bold it is, the more people will believe it. These guys are now doing the same thing with the Coast Guard in declaring it to be a branch of military that it is not supposed to be. It is a maritime police force or law enforcement. They're now laying claim to the liquefied natural gas, LNG energy issue. They are now laying claim to the pollution, EPA, anything and everything that is on the water or attached to the water. These guys are using admiralty, which is constitutional. Federal statutory and federal substantive law sits here. Constitution is here. General Maritime and Admiralty is here. It's on par. We work on, as American Federal Maritime Officers, we work on things called shipping articles. They were enacted in 1791. They're akin to what a U.S. ambassador works on, which are articles of agreement with the United States. They used to call them, before we formed our Constitution, letters of marque. But we do work for the United States. But what's happened is 97% of our fleet is gone. And that should, you hear what's going on with the trucking issue at the border and more. George Bush wants to have Hutchinson Whampoa, a Chinese corporation that's run by an individual who was second in command of the People's Liberation Army, which is a radical right-wing arm. It is the military of the Chinese government. He wants them to scan our containers for us. I don't know what to say beyond that if you don't get it and understand how serious that is. You've heard of what's going on with the Dubai ports deal and Halliburton moving to Dubai. The thing, a lot of people, and even Lou Dobbs has come out and talked about this. We're all safe now because AIG, an insurance company, now owns and controls the ports. 28 major ports, and guess what? They've set up in the federal judiciary a way to escape, much like the Carlyle Group. If the Carlyle Group is it's a holding group. It's much like what G. Edward talked about last night with Warburg, Kuhn & Loeb, Brown Brothers, Harriman, and more. It is a financial holding group, and what they're doing is they're buying military industrial assets, adding value to them, like General Dynamics, San Francisco Dry Dock. You can go through the whole long litany. And they're adding value to them through wars and rumors of war, and then spinning them off and creating another company, and spinning them off and breaking them up and starting another company, and then placing their individuals in charge. And they're doing this not just on the corporate side, they're doing this on the public side. And that's why it is upon you not to just fight, whatever issue brought you here today, whether it be taxes, whether it be, you can go around from table to table to table, Ron Paul, freedom to fascism, Aaron Russo, and my hats off to Aaron Russo. I know probably many people have seen the movie. He fought till his last day to try to bring some truth to some more people. And, there's a lot of people out there like him. And I want to say, and this has been going on, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. This is from World War II. He talks about, and you have to start reading everything. I don't care where you find it. I don't care who's putting it out. Because even if it's coming from neocons, quote unquote, or Republicans, and I used to be a Republican, I changed party affiliation to Democrat before the election with Kerry and Bush, because I saw such a grave and growing threat with President Bush, not realizing that John Kerry was a straw man put up to allow Bush to win. And I'm putting out to you now to consider the fact that I do not think that President Bush is going to leave office. You do not seize this kind of control, this kind of power, Article 51, all the things that I've listed, and walk away with it or give it over to McCain or Clinton or Obama. Whether you think we need another false flag incident, and I'm not trying to scare you, I'm telling you the gospel truth. I'm just doing what I can do. I'm not getting paid for this. I've been, physically and financially and spiritually, every way you can imagine, attacked. I've had the Coast Guard, a branch of military, prosecuting me for the last 5 years, and you won't even believe what the charges are. The Coast Guard charged me with being depressed. And think about that. Great Depression. Okay, no, wait, we can fend off the Great Depression if we prosecute all the people that are being depressed. That way we'll nip it in the bud. I mean, it's not even Orwellian. It's just ridiculous. These guys are playing the same game. And the key in all this, If you go out and you see ALJ Brzezinski, he's the judge who's sitting or presiding on my case right now. He's an ex-lieutenant commander in the Coast Guard. The prosecutor happens to be a JAG officer from the Coast Guard. Well, guess what? The Uniform Code of Military Justice prohibits the military from using any assets or resources. It's actually a federal crime, 2 to 3 years in prison and like $10,000 fine for each violation, from using any assets of a branch of military against civilians, period. These guys are coming out and openly declaring, they're on Dot Mill, the Coast Guard is. But Brzezinski is tied into, he's ruled on a commerce case, and you got to realize that these people have been corrupt and are corrupt and have been corrupt for a long time, and that when you start to push back in one area, you start to realize that, whoa, like you've heard of the scandal with the 8 or 9 U.S. attorneys. Well, guess what? One of them's involved in my situation, Carol C. Lamb from San Diego. She filed a motion in federal district court in San Diego seeking something called sovereign immunity. Do you know what that is? Exactly. No, actually, there is such a thing, but it's not supposed to be applied like they're doing it, because you know what? And there is really supposed to be no immunity, because we're all sovereigns here in the United States. We're all kings and queens. It took the Magna Carta down to and put it in our hands. That was the change in the Constitution. We've got a bunch of individuals from Austria, Bavaria, Germany, through Italy, Spain. You know, if you think of the Spanish Inquisition, even Russia, Kafka, The Trial, if anybody's read that, that's exactly what's going on with me. You would not believe some of the things that are actually on the record in these proceedings. I've been defending myself against a branch of military, and the only thing, one of the reasons I'm doing it and have just not stopped and been continuing to fight is because I understand what the Uniform Code of Military Justice is. I went to a military academy. I understand what Title 10 is. I understand what these guys are trying to do. It didn't even dawn on me as I'm fighting all this. I started to do more and more research and found out that, look, there's other people that have fought this before, like Reed versus Covert. It's a well-settled matter, but these guys are trying to not only pervert and corrupt our judicial system, they're trying to pervert and corrupt the Coast Guard. Right now, they're loading in-close weapon systems, Gatling guns, double-barrel Gatling guns that fire 3,500 rounds per minute on Coast Guard vessels. These are for life-saving for the United States. In a time of declared war by Congress, they come under the U.S. Navy for a reason. They become basically an asset of the U.S. Navy for not only economic but military strategic purposes. What is going on now is absolutely insane. And they're tied to Admiral Loy, who was the U.S. Coast Guard Commandant when a lot of this started with me. He's now working for Lockheed. Start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. You know, it's the military-industrial complex where these guys have been playing the revolving door, and they're not just doing it. You have to understand how our system's set up, and bringing up books like America's Constitution, a biography by Akil Reed Amar, excellent book. This guy's a fascist, but there's a lot of information. Like even G. Edward Griffin said, a lot of the text that are out there has a lot of really good factual information, but then at the very end, they put in a paragraph to somehow twist it all around to say, well, my opinion on all that. There's books like Blackwater, Jeremy Scahill. The Coast Guard is a greater threat right now than Blackwater. If you don't know about Blackwater, pick up this book, Jeremy. I'm not getting anything for coming up and pitching these books to you. I've read them. And I'm telling you that the information that's in here will blow your mind of how far down that slippery slope we have already gone. The issue with Blackwater, and if you don't know about the School of the Americas, a show of hands, how many people here has heard of the School of the Americas? Great. So I'm not talking to, well, for those who haven't or don't know, you can actually read another book here. It's called The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. And she actually gets in here too, how the University of Chicago and the University of Berkeley have been teaching fascism under Milton Friedman and Leo Strauss and their disciples for quite some time, and exporting this down to South America, the Southern Cone. And what's scary about that is that The School of the Americas, I'm trying to find the actual section here on this. The School of the Americas has changed its name, and if anybody knows it offhand, throw it out, because I've got it here somewhere in my notes, but thank you. That's it. The School of the Americas was teaching assassins for South America, programs that Negroponte was running as a U.S. ambassador in Central America for El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and other countries. If you've seen the movie Panama Deception or read about what happened with Panama, Panama didn't exist. We went in and annexed it from Colombia. At some point, that's not what our country is about. That's not what we've stood for. When we went in and we had the Barbary pirates screwing with our ships going into the Med, we formed a fleet, went over there to Tripoli, kicked their ass, came home and laid up the fleet. That's how it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to have a standing army like we are. But what's going on now, and this gets into the bigger picture, and I talked about moving from princely state to kingly state, from kingly state to territorial state, and so on. They are trying to now move from nation state to market state, and they're playing like L. Ron Hubbard, and I'm sorry if there's any followers of L. Ron Hubbard or Scientology in here, but he created a whole new language in his book Dianetics, and people just kind of like said, cool, and followed it. And that's what these guys are doing. They're just coming out and recreating. And the reason they're doing it is there's a guy named Peter Phillips, and he's the Project Censored, I think is the name of it. He's spoken in San Diego. Excellent speaker. You should get him, have him. And one of the things that I mentioned out there, and I'd ask you to go read the transcripts, the highlighted portions, and read the 2 placards that are down there, because I really need some help in what's going on with myself. But guys like Peter Phillips, Project Censored, he's written a book called Impeachment with Dennis Liu as well. He talks about that the DOD owns and controls 66 million acres worldwide. And what happens, just like the former Soviet Union and Germany and every other republic, if you go back to even Rhodes and when the Colossus came down, they have a marker like the World Trade Center. When that comes down, all bets are off, and they sell everything, both public and private, and then recreate. And they use the system to oppress and suppress all the people so they can't rise up and take back their government. They basically set up the system. I mean, there's federal funding, local police and more. They're basically federalized the local police. What they're doing is that 66 million acres, it's not just the land, it's the access to the land that it's near. It's the timber that sits on it. It's the water that sits on it. It's the little critters that are running around on it, but it's the gold, coal, uranium, oil, and more that sits underneath it, and that land is almost invaluable. It's worth hundreds of trillions of dollars. Do you think our problems are pretty bad now? Well, they're curable if we take control of our government and take it back. And that's upon all of us. It's not just about getting people, the right people in office, but it's also about holding the people that are currently in office accountable. You see, Don Siegelman, I don't know, does anybody here, show of hands, know who Don Siegelman is? He was the Alabama governor and attorney general. He held like 4 positions in Alabama. They railroaded him, put him in jail, and I'm not talking about his innocence or guilt, but it's starting to look more and more that due process was violated over and over and over and over again. When you start seeing that, you start to realize there's something else going on here. It's political. He's been released from jail. He's going to actually be testifying before Congress. So when you start to, and even stories of like Dick Cheney, right? He bought land in Colorado and was going and hanging out, and people started carrying signs, and every time he would appear in public, they would turn their backs on him. And no, you laugh, but it works, because you know what? They're human. And some people would beg to differ with me and argue that they're from another planet. And they are, you know, we won't go down that road. Because they are inhuman in many ways. And they act very inhuman and very callous. But we've seen this before. Kings and queens and guillotines. And they're trying to pull the same crap, and excuse my French, and put us back in a system of feudalism to seize all of the public trust, all of the commonwealth. You know, the perfect examples are Congressman Christopher Cox from Dana Point. So this is happening in your area. If you're from this area, this is people, you know, pulling this here. Congressman Christopher Cox from Dana Point. He found this stash of helium. And if anybody knows about Zeppelins and the Hindenburg and all sorts of other stuff, you realize that we were the only producers of helium in the world up until well after World War II. We had deals with the Nazis to sell them helium. We nixed it because they marched into Czechoslovakia and Poland. The Hindenburg was actually supposed to be filled with helium. It was built bigger because helium is less buoyant. They had to fill it with hydrogen. He finds this stash, Congressman Christopher Cox from Dana Point, finds this stash of helium that's worth more than its weight in gold, a U.S. Treasury asset, because he does such a good job in working across the aisle between Democrats, Republicans, probably a couple independents and others thrown in there too. He gets rewarded because he sold this U.S. Treasury asset to private interests, Lockheed Martin and others, who are using it at Skunk Works for some very interesting programs. They're building lighter than aircraft now that have an active matrix skin to where you look up, and just like they used to do in World War I and World War II, they used to paint the underside of the aircraft like light blue so you wouldn't see it on a day that had a light blue sky. And I guess, you know, on a day that was kind of gray, they'd have to paint it gray. But these guys have, and they're building these Zeppelins that have an active matrix screen on the hull, so it projects, if you look up and you're, say, looking at the moon at night, it projects what you would normally see if the vessel weren't there. That's how high-tech and the kind of stuff that we're paying for, rather than paying for this type of technology, Zeppelins and more, to be carrying on international trade and commerce, transportation. You know, we have the technology to build these kind of craft now and use them as cruise ships, literally. But instead, they're being used as weapons against us. The sheriffs in LA, they're using drones now. The sheriff's department is using military assets. The Coast Guard, they're using unmanned, they were trying to use Predator Bs, the unmanned combat aerial vehicles, and they've come out now and spun it all, because I've been out there very vocal about what they are doing, because I know, and now they're spun and saying, well, no, we're not using the combat aerial vehicles or whatever. But at some point, the Coast Guard is doing all this stuff that it's not supposed to be doing, and they're doing things, and I mentioned about, and I'm sorry to be all over the map and throw so much out, but I'm just trying to like get everybody up to speed as much as possible in a very short period of time, so that you can see that you need to start holding events like this and helping Payman and other people to do it, not just quarterly, not just once a year. I mean, you really need to do it minimally quarterly on bigger events, but weekly. Your town halls, your churches, wherever, and get this information out and stop people on the street. Anybody in here, raise your hand, know about chemtrails? Oh my, great. How many people in here now, out of that show of hands that was almost unanimous, how many of you people stop one person a day, and when you see them go, look at this, come here, and point it out to them? Good. Anyway, that one person? Okay, my hand's up too. Okay, we see about 10 people out of almost everyone that raised their hands. If you stop one person per day when you see it and take the time to be well informed on it and explain to them the difference between a contrail, be able to talk about PV equals NRT, because they'll be like, what? Exactly right. That's what they'll be like, oh, okay, this guy's really smart. I don't want to, like, you know, argue against him or anything. And then explain to them what the difference between a contrail and a chemtrail is. PV equals NRT is gas laws. It's, sorry? With the chemtrails and contrails? Well, contrails is condensation trails. When an aircraft moves through the upper atmosphere, the pressure, and this goes into all stuff that happened with the World Trade Center and all kinds of other stuff like the Pentagon and more, the pressure of the vessel pushing through the air condenses the atmosphere, the environment, the air right in front of it, the moisture and more. And when the vessel goes through the aircraft, you see a trail of condensation that dissipates almost instantaneously after the aircraft goes through. It's probably like yeah, exactly. And there's probably all kinds of FAA and other people in here too that know about, but you need to get out and talk about this stuff and spread the good word. And I hate to be biblical about this because it is, and I'm not a Bible thumper. We've seen this before. Does anybody know of or ever heard of Plato? You ever read The Republic? Yes. Allegory of the Cave? Yes. Right. When was that written?
400 BC.
Yeah, 2,500 years ago. More or less, 2,500 years ago. They knew, because these are the same games that they have been playing for if I can use this, God knows how long. And it's about building up civilizations and then tearing them down intentionally to rape and pillage the treasury to make themselves, you can't even imagine the amount of wealth and stuff that has been seized over time. The things that are going on, you have to become active. There's people like myself. I've got a radio program on Genesis Communications Network. It's GCN Live. It's on Saturdays from 1 to 3 Pacific. I do right now, and this is a huge asset for every person in this room. They're Time Warner, cable access. They have public access. You can go on and make your own half-hour or couple-hour. All you need to do is take a 2-hour producers program at like Time Warner in Santa Monica or Time Warner in Van Nuys. And there's all sorts of other public access places around the United States, both not just like PBS, but ones that you can walk in and you can produce your own show. But guess what? By the end of the year, that's going to be all over. They're changing that. So right now, just like a lot of the information that people like G. Edward Griffin have seized from history and brought forth and compiled and condensed and explained to us all, we need to do the same thing in videos, books, even going back to the 60s about bumper stickers and more, because this is not about the, well, I should correct myself there. I was going to say this is not about the sovereignty of the United States. It is. It is not just about the sovereignty of the United States, it's the sovereignty of the world. It's the sovereignty of every individual alive today, because what they are trying to do is to recreate feudalism. They are trying to recreate kings and queens, self-appointed royal families. And many of these people, if you start to, George, and I talk about this and people are like, well, so Paul McCartney was knighted by the Queen too. Ronald Reagan, who fired all those air traffic controllers, carried on an economic and an attack upon our public servants and our infrastructure, our airline infrastructure, who fired all these air traffic controllers. He's supposed to bring in a federal mediator. He's supposed to get those people back to work. He's supposed to keep those people at work because they were the best trained people at the time. They did it to steal pensions. They did it to steal jobs. They did it to take over control of our air transportation system. And look, we end up with 9/11. If you don't think there's a tie there, then you need to do a little bit more reading and understand what's going on in history. What else was Ronald Reagan? He was governor of California. Supposedly he did some great things for the UC school system. University of California, Berkeley is tied to Milton Friedman and Leo Strauss. That's odd. And Ronald Reagan was also not only a member of SAG, Screen Actors Guild, which many of our founding fathers were, guilds, unions, associations, trades, and more, and something that England hates, because when we work together, it's amazing what we can do. You know what the real assets are in here? Forget about the $10 trillion debt. You know what the real assets are here in this country? Everybody sitting in this room. The American people. That is invaluable, because when we set our minds to do anything, it is amazing what we can do. One of the things that we need to do, we must do, is end this war in Iraq. End this war in Afghanistan. Bring the troops home, and not just from Afghanistan and Iraq, 130 countries or more, 139 I think it is, countries around the world, because you know what? You bitch about, and excuse my French, you bitch about taxes. Where do you think that's all going? National Strategic Oil Reserve. Teapot Dome, does anybody remember that? You know what that scandal was all about? Elk Hills, California. #1 oil well, 13th most productive well in the United States, or I think it's in the United States, ever. Kellogg Corporation, anybody, does that ring a bell to anybody? Hey, Kellogg, Brown and Root, Halliburton, the guys that are playing the same game now. They tried to privatize the National Strategic Oil Reserve back in, and that's what Teapot Dome was more or less about. There's a lot more to it, but they're doing the same thing now, and you know what? The Coast Guard's involved because the $20 billion of oil and kerosene and gasoline and fuel and heating oil and more that President Bush took off of the market, we paid for it, our tax dollars, $20 billion, boom. Guess what? We paid for it twice. Because you know what that did? It affected supply and demand in an adverse fashion. Rather than helping the economy, helping us, it actually raised the price because it took and affected supply and demand. It took oil and energy products off the market, so we paid for it at the pump again. All of these are economic attacks upon the American people. They're directed at the American people. And I was getting to this, but Ronald Reagan, okay, he was president of SAG, Screen Actors Guild, not just a member. What's the thing from hair clubs for men? I'm not just a member, I'm the president or whatever. Or I'm not just the president, I'm a member. President Reagan was knighted by the Queen of England. George Herbert Walker Bush was knighted by the Queen of England. Colin Powell was knighted by the Queen of England. Sorry? This gets into the Order of the Knights of Malta, and they did the same thing because that's what they were doing, was basically knights working in service to the Queen who were impoverishing a nation state. Oh no, I was getting there. Let me finish. Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, and it is a hereditary title that's passed on to your children. So our current president is a knight working for the Queen. When you talk about treason, and I'm recorded. Not just Reagan, Bush, Kissinger, Greenspan. Does anybody know who Greenspan is? Raise your hands. Come on. Alan Greenspan, come on. I see some hands that aren't up. He's done more damage. I mean, there was the other thing. I'm trying to think of what Reagan did, the other thing other than Patco when he came in. This is very important what's going on today, not just Bear Stearns and everything else. One of the things that Ronald Reagan declared when he came in office, he wanted to devalue the dollar. Anybody think that he has a pretty good legacy right now for what he claimed, what he wanted to do? Yeah, why would a president want to come in and devalue our dollar? Because if your dollar is worth $1 today and it's worth 90 cents tomorrow, doesn't that take money out of your pocket? Isn't that an unlawful tax? Isn't that something that a foreign nation or foreign power or foreign interests would carry on? People are looking to Wall Street. I say that you need to look a little bit beyond Wall Street, and you need to look back to our roots and who is carrying this on. And it has been planned, like even G. Edward Griffin and others have said. This has been going on for, Michael Cullen Piper. Am I saying his name right? Michael C. Piper, right? He gets a lot of information out too. There's a lot of other people out here. This has been going on for, like I said, not decades, not 50 years. World War I and World War II were psyops carried out upon the American people. What happened in 1913 with what G. Edward Griffin was? Yeah, Federal Reserve Act, right? Well, guess what happened in 1915? The Coast Guard was created. You know who else was knighted by the Queen of England? Colin Powell, Norman Schwarzkopf, Giuliani, he's a total fascist, and this guy that the Coast Guard just came out with 2 brand new vessels, national security cutters. They're basically creating a de facto Navy. They called them the Bertholf and the Vosch. 2 good German names. Does that shock anybody, surprise anybody here in America? And nothing against German Americans or American Germans. Hey, we need them. There's an old world thing here in Huntington. I like going over there for. I'm trying to be funny because we're all Americans first and foremost. I don't care where you came from. When you come here, your loyalty is to this country, to this Constitution, to the rule of law, not the rule of men. That was the thing that is different about our country, is that we do not believe in knights. We do not believe in kings and queens and guillotines. We believe in the rule of law. And until we start to impose the rule of law on individuals like DeLay, like Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham, Duncan Hunter, and this is a sign, I'm from San Diego, born and raised. I miss my hometown. It's been a while since I've been back down there. Duncan Hunter was trying to set up his son to take over his congressional seat. If that's not feudalism, if that's not royalism, I don't know what is. Okay, I do. Bill Clinton, our former president, he was not knighted by the Queen of England. No, you're wrong, because it's not good, because he was actually nominated for a higher title than knighthood, which is the Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports. It's the highest title that the Queen bestows upon any individual. He did not get it. But you say, well, he didn't accept it or whatever. He didn't want it because he's a true American, right? Yeah, in line with Carnegie and Mellon and J.P. Morgan and others. And in my own situation, other than Carol C. Lamb, a U.S. attorney who was one of the 8 or 9 that was recently fired, guess who else I have involved? J.P. Morgan's heir apparent. This guy, Archie Morgan III from American President Lines. American President Lines used to be our premier flag carrier. It was a U.S. corporation that used to name all our ships after American presidents. Now it's a foreign company, moved under Neptune Orient Lines. It's owned and controlled, majority stake by a Singaporean company that's owned and controlled by the Singaporean government. T-Mobile, cell phones, telecommunications, it's a German corporation owned majority stake by the German government. ICANN, Al Gore created the internet, right? Right? ICANN, for addresses, names, and numbers for the internet, it's a Belgian company. So you start to look at what is going on in our country, and we are being betrayed. And I don't know if anybody remembers what we did to, who's that guy? And it relates to maritime, Benedict Arnold. Yeah, and we've got a lot of them. We've got a lot of them. And we need to clean house on each and all of them, one at a time if that's how it happens. And a lot of us may not survive to see it. And I've, again, taken on a lot of hits, and I really need some help because it's hard for any individual. I don't care who you are or what kind of resources or assets you've had. They've stripped me of everything. My home's in San Diego. I had a house down on, you'll love this, on Law Street. You couldn't write this kind of stuff. They held me in a hotel room in San Diego for 8 months as they were prosecuting me aggressively for quote-unquote being depressed. They have related this to the death of my father, who died in the midst of all this. Matson, which is one of the shipping companies that helped take over the Hawaiian Islands from the Hawaiians, Captain Matson, this goes back, about 100 years ago. They're tied to American President Lines. American President Lines, which used to be a U.S. corporation, a government corporation that we took over in the middle of World War II, assimilated Hamburg America Lines. Hamburg America Lines was one of the 3 companies that was controlled by the Bush dynasty that was shut down in the middle of World War II for trading with the enemy, along with Union Banking Corp. So you start to see I was going to start with this, and I guess I can end with it, the 6 degrees of separation, like the Kevin Bacon game from Hollywood. And you start to see how all of this interplays, that everything that you are feeling, everything that you were affected by is interrelated. And right now, the best way, we learned this from Saddam Hussein, right, is to take out the head. And I don't mean this like, overt revolution, but we need to impeach George Bush. John Conyers is coming out and saying, well, I'm being counseled by legal counsel, I don't know where he's getting his counsel from, that we can impeach him after. And it's like, no, you lose venue and jurisdiction then, because impeachment's a political process. It's to remove them from office. If he's out, what's the point in impeachment? You need to prosecute him in court. And for these individuals to come out and try to be, they keep coming up with every single reason not to impeach. It's time now and I'm not talking about the safety of Americans. I'm talking about the safety of the world, because these guys are warmongers. These guys sell war, and we need to end it so that this money, our taxes and everything else, is under our control, is used for commerce, trade, and transportation. Again, I need help badly. Right now, I am under attack from the Coast Guard that's declaring itself to be a special branch of military. The judge who's involved is not only involved in commerce cases, he ruled on a case called TSA versus Rendon, where they took a TSA agent through the security checkpoint. He cursed and said, they told him to step aside, they had to wand him. He cursed and said, "This is effing ridiculous." Police came over, cited him $700. So now everyone here in this room, because they set up this whole scam, it's a racket, it's a mafia, to charge each and all of you, if you use a public utility, like an airport, like a subway, taxi even, and all of a sudden the taxi cab driver's not going to let you out unless you pay your $700 fine, because you're locked in there, and you know, they call the police if you don't pay, because they want to privatize everything. They use the government to create the regulations and then pass it over to themselves. That's fascism, that's corporatism, that's using the government for their own self-interest. So now, and that was converted not only from an administrative proceeding into the Sixth Circuit to where now you are all liable for a $700 fine. They just had up here in, I think it was in LA, Federal District Court, an attorney and his client were fined $29,000 for 73 violations in a deposition for cursing. So, on that note, I could really use some help in getting out and getting heard and a circling of the wagons, not only around myself, but the information that I possess that I'm trying to get out to you about so many other topics. I've just barely touched on a lot of them. So peace, keep doing what you guys are doing, and thank you.
Thanks. I hate to do it to you, but then,
All right, folks, we're going to break for lunch. This is just another example where we are all hoping that we can at least communicate with the military and the police officers and help them all to understand that we are not the enemy. We are the good guys. It's going to fall upon the onus of responsibility is going to fall on their shoulders to understand what their oaths of office are, to protect and serve in regard to the police officers, and to support and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, as far as the military. Let's see if we can't offer them an open hand and not a clenched fist, because they may be our last line of defense.